Afternoon. Andrew Smith from Tribe. We're going to start about a project here that's just starting development, and you just heard about one that's just starting operations, which hopefully will be quicker, but we'll see. We'll get to it. I'll run you through a bit of the background on it. I'm not going to concentrate on what waste to energy is and stuff like that. We've just had a great presentation how it works, so I'm just going to concentrate on what's happening with the project and how we're going to try and plan it to get the logistics working and the site out of Parks and what's going on with that. Parks, which is one of the precincts they've chosen, the EPA, as the special activation precinct out there, is 350 kilometres west of Sydney. It's in a special activation precinct, which is sort of a large industrial zone. It's where all the railways meet. There's several intermodal facilities out there. And I suppose we've done some drop-in sessions in Parks recently, and a lot of people asking, why is it here? And I think the argument is that the government is looking for jobs in regional areas. You've got the intermodals, and that's a good spot to put it rather than in Western Sydney or in Sydney. But we'll deal with that one when it goes down the track. Yeah, we've heard about the landfill crisis, and this is one of the plants that we're hoping to get online by 2030. I'll show you a timeline later. 31 maybe, depending how fast they move. It's already been a long journey, so hopefully it speeds up. We started this with an expression of interest back in 2020. 17 groups responded to that proposal. They then got shortlisted for a non-binding offer. There was 3 in that. Then the binding offer and shortlisted. They then took us through another process called the BAFO, a best and final offer. Then some elections got in the way, so we waited a few months for that, and then we negotiated for another year. And finally we signed contracts in the Friday before Christmas, which was lucky, because then we got Christmas off. Didn't have to work through that, but came back in January starting. So we've just kicked off the development progress. We have, obviously a long haul on these projects in New South Wales to try and do the environmental impact studies. And so what are we going to do? That is the Parks region. You see the Park City there. The site is about 5 kilometres west of it in the Special Activation Precinct. The government, through its subdivision of the Department of Planning called Regional Growth Development Corporation, which is sort of our client for the SAP, they own the SAP. They've bought 4,600 acres out there. So it's a fairly big area. They've bought a lot of the properties, so there's big buffer zones. There is a railway line running right past the site, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute. So the plan is we're going to be putting waste on rail and taking it out to Parks in containers similar to what Veolia was doing at Woodlawn for the last 20 years. The facility out there, as you heard from the EPA, we're planning 600,000 tonnes minimum. We're looking at waste market studies at the moment and how much is in the market. There is a lot more than that, but we're going to sit that at it'll be 2 lines. We will hopefully achieve 96% diversion like Kwinana is. We'll have a bottom ash recycling facility, which is the building behind the stack there on site. It'll put out very similar amounts of electricity into the grid at Parks. The SAP is building a substation for us, which is nice because we don't have to build that. And the usual other same volumes of metals recovered and APCRs. We may treat the APCRs on site, we're not sure yet. That's the site. It's a very greenfield site. That's the old farmer's house there on the right. Just below the thing is the big Pacific National Intermodal Terminal. So we could take the containers in there and run them down, or we could even take from the railway line there a sort of a spur line in straight into the facility of the tipping hall, which saves an awful lot of handling and problems with odours straight in. You don't want to be opening trucks, opening up containers outside it. So it's a big site. It's 30 hectares. The site in Kwinana, I think, and the Rockingham one is 8 to 10 hectares only. So way too much land, but it's good to have the buffers. I will point out the tree line at the bottom there, the bottom half actually goes underwater in a flood. So while we're renting 30 hectares, we're only going to get 20. We tried to move it, they said no. The other part of this project, and we'll get on to why it's complicated with the planning, is we have to build a couple of intermodal transfer stations in Sydney. We have one site already selected at St Mary's. We're looking at another site that's in the north. For people not from Sydney, that's in the northwest, and we're looking at the southeast near Botany Bay or somewhere slightly in the inner west there to try and capture most of the Sydney area. So these transfer stations are not your usual transfer stations for normal waste from truck to truck. We will compact the waste into these containers to try and maximise the delivery. We can probably, we know Veolia gets about 31 tonnes in the containers. Hopefully we get a bit more than that. Veolia has a limit on their containers at the other end where they have to put on a road and haul it up to their landfill. We don't have to do that at the other end, so we're hoping to compact as much into them as we can to make it more efficient. We'll have big loaders that put it on top of the train. This was a slide we put together ages ago to show you the trucks will pick it up in the morning, drop it off, the first cut at 11. We will then haul it out of probably the St Mary's transfer station, like around midnight. It's hard to pull it out during the day due to the Sydney train network, so they take priority. So there will be slots all night long, and that's when most of the freight trains roll out of Sydney. So it'll be up in Parks by probably, I think it's 11-hour trip. That's our train system. 350 kilometres in 11 hours, you could probably do it a bit quicker in your car, but it will go via Cootamundra, so it'll probably do 480 kilometres on the train, and that's just the best system we've got. It could go straight over the Blue Mountains, but that's trickier with Sydney trains, with the steepness of that grade, etc. So we're working through that with the different train operators. So hopefully these two stations will be up running well before this thing comes online and be able to put 350,000 tonnes through each of them. And for the people out there in Sydney, or the councils especially, that's the location of the Sydney, the St Mary's. I put a 45-minute isochrone for a truck there to show you how far you can get. We're probably going to look at 30 minutes. I think that's more reasonable, but when you finish your run, you've got to try and get to the St Mary's transfer station, and then it'll be put on the train. It's pretty convenient. That's a fairly extensive coverage to make sure that all councils will have an opportunity, I think, to deliver waste to this facility. We also have a southeastern one. It's not decided, but that was placed near the Veolia one at Banks Meadow to see how far that goes, and that's 45 minutes covering the North Shore, covering southwest there. So pretty good coverage. Most councils will be able to sort of accommodate the end of their runs and putting it into our transfer station if that happens down the track on your tenders. We have been developing the St Mary's look. That's a 3D render. You can see the train in the background. The site we've selected is on Leehelm Drive there. It's a high quality site, but who are our partners in the consortium. It's 3 or 4 hectares. It's got plenty of room. The train line adjoins the back of the site. So waste trucks will flow in there, the waste collection trucks, it'll be compacted inside the shed, the hall there, and then it'll be just lifted straight out the back fence onto about a 350 metre front of an intermodal terminal owned by Pac National. Loading trains will take an hour, 2 hours, unloading them is quick, the train haulage is slow. So we're looking at 350,000 tonnes through that, which is quite a lot for a transfer station. I think the Clyde transfer station Veolia is 450, the Makesman is 350, so it's quite feasible and it's doable, and I think it's it's a good solution. What are we currently doing? We kicked off in January, February. We've started stakeholder management. I think that's our first cab off the rank. We've been out to parks. We're starting on the St Mary's stakeholder management, explaining to people what's happening. There's a few groups in parks that are asking why it's here. There's a few questions that we have to answer. We've done 3 days of drop-in sessions. We've presented to council several times. We're getting the word out there how it works. It's all about emissions out there. It's a greenfield site. It's not so much about the logistics, because the train solution actually works really well. You won't have any extra trucks. So the people are asking lots of good questions. The council is supportive. RGDC is obviously helping us out on that quite well. Thank you to them on the assistance. And that will continue. We'll continue that all year, right through to submission of the DA, and then beyond that as well, to keep people informed. And that's the website if you need to get more information. Parks Energy Company is up and running. You'll find a lot of information there on the project, more than what I'm giving here. And we'll see how we go on that. So we started in this process. We just appointed consultants to help us with the EIS. We're going to spend probably 12 months doing those studies, if not longer. We will be putting it in. There is a special planning pathway for the special activation precincts to try and make it faster and easier. I don't think we'll be given much assistance getting it faster through that. We're going to have to go through the full whole EIS process, a full SSD out there, and we'll try and juggle the SAP pathway out there and also the transfer stations in Sydney. So initial chats with Department of Planning, very positive, like we can run these two at once. You understand we can't have one without the other. Good to have a burner out there going, but if you can't get the waste to it, it's not going to work very well, and vice versa. So that's going to be a tricky one to put forward. They're going to have to be juggled together, and there will be, obviously different interactions on both, and hopefully not a too different pathway to get it forward. And so we'll work through that. I don't think that's been sort of done before in a waste-to-energy plant, so we'll just see how we go. But we're going to keep in close contact with planning and EPA, with many sort of discussions happening at the moment. For the contracts for councils and stuff, what we're planning, and we've already, obviously had some discussions with some councils, and some are very interested. These contracts are similar to what we did instigated in the Rockham plant in Perth those years ago. It's a waste arising, so there's no guarantee on tonnage. I'm not going to ask you have to give us all your tonnage or you're going to pay. We just ask you what is in the red bin is given to us. I think they'll like that. So then if you need to take stuff out of the red bin, for example, FOGO, coming in the future, might take waste volume out of our red bin, we're okay with that. So you can keep processing on different technologies that come up in the future to try and reduce your volume going to landfill. We do look for the long term. We're going to need long-term contracts to finance this thing. 10 years is probably the minimum. We prefer 15 and stuff. So you have to look at, can you do that? I know they're not the norm in New South Wales, but we have managed to do them in Perth all those years ago, and they are working quite well. And I think most councils realise that, and it's also going to give you a good long-term view of what your costs are going to be. You won't have to risk a landfill levy, which may go up more than CPI, we don't know. So those risks, I think, are worth looking at for this type of facility. And yeah, there's 600,000 tonnes of capacity at the moment. We are looking for waste, and we're going to be looking for waste over the next 2 years. We'll have to have a certain amount of contracts in place before financial close. And financial close is due to looking at the moment in early 2027. So we will be needing to look at, council tenders and processes between now and then. There's the timeline I've been talking about when it comes up. Sorry, there it is. So we just started the process. 24, 23, 22 was winning the tender. We will look to be submitting in Q2 2026, and I suppose the interesting date there is hopefully 3.5 years construction, approvals in late 26, financial close 27, and taking waste in late 2031, which is the plan. So you start looking at your tenders and stuff for that. That's the sort of timeline you're going to have to be looking at and lock it in to try and get waste disposal at this facility. That's it for me. Hopefully that's a brief explanation of what's happening and understanding it.